All right. Good morning, Doug. Today we're doing a Friday Q&A. We got a bunch of questions from our viewers. Generally, if you want to submit questions to Doug to be answered, be sure to join our Telegram channel because that's where I ask for the questions and that's where I compile them. And you can do that by looking in the description. There'll be a link to our Telegram channel. So, Doug, starting off, can you ask Doug for his perspective of the 1994 Rwandan genocide?
Well, it's funny because just last week I read an article about disaster in the London Review of Books, a very left-wing publication, as is the New York Review of Books. But that said, full of information. Unfortunately, it didn't make any cosmic breakthroughs as to exactly why did it happen. Why did these two groups, the Hutu and the Tutsi, why did they go at each other this way? And instantly, another question that was left unanswered in this supposedly authoritative article was why in the country next door, Burundi, which has the same dichotomy of people, why didn't it spill over there? Anyway, I'll tell you what I know about it. I've never wandered through Rwanda. I spent several days in Goma, which is the city right on the border of Rwanda. And I'll tell you what I know about it. What everybody thinks they know, and is probably true, is that somewhere in between 500,000 and 1 million people were killed, most of them Tutsis. And I'm not sure you can even tell the difference between a Tutsi and a Hutu by looking at them, although it is said that the Tutsis are taller and kind of more elegant looking than the Hutus, and the Tutsis were generally in control of things and were the upper class, because when the Belgians owned Rwanda and Burundi, they just, for whatever reasons, I can't remember what they were, put the Tutsis in command. So apparently the Hutu just got tired of it and indulged in a mass genocide using machetes. Not guns at all. Guns were illegal. So it must have been particularly bloody. Anyway, what do I know about it personally, other than what I've just told you? From spending a few days in Goma, where I was staying at a friend's house right on the lake, we used to go swimming in the lake every morning. And it was very nice. That was Lake Kivu, very large African lake. And probably the size of Lake Erie or something like that. It's pretty big. And I asked him, I said, listen, what was it like during the disaster in Rwanda, which was, I don't know how many years before that it was, 10 from when I was there. And he says, well, I couldn't go swimming because there were bodies floating everywhere here on the lake. It was impossible. But we went swimming on it 10 years after the fact. I guess most of the bodies sank to the bottom or were dredged up or something like that. Another interesting thing about Rwanda, has nothing to do with the Hutu-Tutsi thing, is that Lake Kivu is one of, apparently, they say, 3 lakes in Africa, and by far the biggest one, which has massive amounts of carbon dioxide and also methane that are subsurface. And you may or may not have heard, this was about 20 years ago, on one of the other 3 lakes, much smaller, there was and this is a very volcanic region because there are volcanoes all over this part of Africa. There was some type of an underwater disturbance and massive amounts of CO2 and methane were released, and thousands of people and animals got killed around this other lake. So that's a problem of living in Rwanda or that area. So what can I say other than, there's a great movie. I really highly recommend. Have you ever seen Dark of the Sun, Matt?
No.
fantastic movie. It's about the mercenaries in the Congo during the early 60s. And it stars Rod Taylor and a German guy who, of course, plays the heavy. And it's a great movie about the mercenaries in the Congo doing what they did after the Congo became independent. So put that on your watch list. You'll be mightily entertained by it. I saw that movie in Washington, D.C. Came out in 1967 during the riots, and the only movie theater it was showing in was on Park Road in Northwest. And although the riots were over, they were just over, and idiotically, I'm a white guy by himself, and I drive into the heart of the ghetto, park my car, watch it in the theater, and got out fine. But I've seen it since. Anyway, watch that. But incidentally, that movie, I'm sure, in 1967 was filmed in Goma, which at that time had about 20,000 people. But now Goma looks like an anthill with, who knows, 1 million, maybe 2 million refugees from God knows where, from one of those civil wars, or who knows what's going on. The reason I went there was a mining project that was about, 50 miles to the north of Goma. So anyway, long answer to a short question.
Well, Dark of the Sun, that's the name of the movie?
Gotta see it with Rod Taylor, fantastic movie. And including the score, the scene, the music, really good.
All right, I will definitely put it on my list. Okay, next question is, what is the single best investment either of us have made?
Well, that's easy for me. Mine was Diamond Fields, and it was originally intended to go after offshore diamonds off the coast of Namibia, because the rivers in southern Africa start in the highlands, in the Kimberley area, and if they wash over a kimberlite, then they kind of naturally mine the diamonds over millions of years, and they're taken downstream by the river and wind up in the ocean. And in process of being tumbled down the river, hundreds of miles over millions of years, only the best diamonds survive. And Diamond Fields was going to mine offshore diamonds, which exist. So I bought the private placement at 25 cents with a full warrant. Turned out that mining diamonds in the ocean offshore was uneconomic. So there was also a property in Labrador that they happened to have. And the geologists, this is a true story, crazy story, just like the first part of it's crazy. Kind of in retrospect, seemed like a good idea to me at the time. I bought 100,000 units at a quarter. And so anyway, what happens is the geologists are coming back from looking at something. It's the last helicopter ride in before they wrap things up and forget about Labrador. And they look at this kind of rust-looking formation on the side of a hill. And they say, that's kind of interesting. We sat down there. They took some samples, and it turned out to be how the Voisey Bay nickel deposit was discovered, one of the biggest and richest nickel deposits in the world. So once again, long answer to a short question, best investment I ever made. Stock went from a quarter to about $200. And I rode it most of the way up. And of course, there were the warrants too. So I really had 200,000 shares. It was a fantastic hit. That's it. What about you, Matt?
Well, best, I would say investment has been in my own businesses, actual investments. Speculations, would be Bitcoin. I just don't think there's anything, crypto has been, it's been a speculation. I haven't looked at that as like an investment in the same way. I've looked at it as a speculation, and that has been, just crazy incredible. I bought a lot of Bitcoin at, like $600. At least I bought it before that, but I lost it. But most of the Bitcoin I have today, I bought at around $600. So that's a big gain. And, I would say also with Ethereum, same thing. But my wealth was created from my own businesses.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, actually. And I think most people that become wealthy or even well-to-do do it because they have a business that they started and they nurtured. I mean, I think that's a genuine fact. I had two other things because at the same time I got into well, I said during the great, I think it was the bull market that ended, the mining bull market that ended, it was like 1996 to 97, roughly. And the other thing I got into, Diamond Fields was a complete accident. Surprised everybody. It was just one of those flukes that can happen and nobody expected it. It was just an accident. My other big hit was Briex, which was the greatest mining fraud in history, worth about $4.5 billion, total fraud in Indonesia. And I bought a lot of that stock at $1 or less and more as it went up. And it went to like $200 too. And of course, I don't ride these things all the way up and sell them at the top, but I still had some sell at the top. And I had an accident, a fraud, and the third stock was, I call it a psychotic break. And this was a company in Ethiopia. And I did a private placement at $1 with the full warrant, another one at $2 with the full warrant. Stock went to $20. And that one I called a psychotic break because there was a broker in Chicago. He was a very big broker and he was very big in mining stocks. And for whatever, his name was Blake Joyner. I remember Blake well. We went on trips together and he went crazy. And he put all of his clients into, the hell was the name of that stock? It's still trading. And the mine in East Africa turned out went to $20. Anyway, so my three biggest hits in quick succession were a fraud, a psychotic break, and an accident. Typical of the mining business.
Wow. Okay. Let's see. Next question. Doug, do you have any stories about Ottawa, Canada? I'm guessing this is a Canuck who is curious about if you've had any experiences or stories with Ottawa.
Kind of a strange question. What I know about Ottawa, I've been there. I don't know what to say about it. I know it's the fourth or fifth biggest city in Canada. So it's about 1 million people or something like that. But it's Canada's answer to Washington, D.C. So I don't see much to attract one to Ottawa because it's full of government employees, quite frankly. It's the capital of Canada.
Got it. Okay. What does Doug think about value cycles? He says that this is where you divide one good's price by another.
Okay, well, that makes sense. But the fact is that you don't have to do that. What you can do is just compare the dollar prices of the two things and you arrive at the same conclusion. But perhaps that question is a little bit more in comparing, let's say, take corn and soybeans, okay? You look at the price of one and the price of the other. You look at the protein content of one, protein content of the other, and compare them. And you can compare corn and cattle, because cattle are mostly fed corn. Or you can compare cattle and hogs. Their prices fluctuate drastically. In fact, right now is just about a historic time when hogs are selling for more than cattle. I'm looking to go long cattle sometime in the next few months, incidentally, for what it's worth. Gold and silver have their own ratio. I mean, everybody used to think gold and silver were that, God had designated 17-1 as the only correct ratio between gold and silver, and then went up to 100-1. And So yeah, it's very interesting comparing the ratios between different commodities and different everything, quite frankly. So something to watch.
Okay. Next question is a little bit of an odd one. It says, is Doug aware of the birth certificate system of bondage and how we as humans are bonded sureties living in commerce for the national debt? If so, has he ever considered correcting his status to a living man on the soil?
You know, I don't know where ideas like this arise. I mean, I'm not in bondage, and that has to do with the law or some type of crazy ideas that somebody came up with. National debt. I mean, it's not my national debt is not my problem. I mean, they're trying to make it my problem and everybody else's. But no, forget about all this stuff. You're what you might call a sovereign individual. So, you know, this whole concept about bondage and, you know, cleanse that from your mind, whatever is there. And I don't quite understand the question.
Right. Well, and also, I'll just say the idea that there's some, you know, that they were basically in a system of bondage because of some, you know, legal loophole, you know, we're basically with the birth certificate system or whatever, and that the way out of it is through some legal loophole. If you just follow this legal loophole, then, you know, you're no longer subject to it, I think is a total fantasy. Honestly, I feel like if the state decides you're a problem, whatever legal loopholes you think you have satisfied, I think you'll find very quickly are going to evaporate in a heartbeat. So I just don't think, you know, the state is a risk to people's individual liberty and sovereignty always. There is no legal loophole out of it. I think that's just a fact. That's just my opinion anyway.
Well, I totally agree. And I'd urge the questioner to re-examine his premises. He's thinking in state terms, and that's a mistake.
Okay, next question. Hi, Doug. This is from an Aussie currently in the UK. They said they tried to escape lockdown, but ended up in the UK, which has not ended up being a good situation for them. And so their question is, if you had only three options of living in Australia, UK, or Brazil, what would you choose?
Well, as we've mentioned here before, the entire world is becoming less free, and I'm unconvinced that since the powers of darkness have found how successful it is to use a virus hysteria to lock things down, I'm not sure things are going to get much better very soon. But if those are your three countries, not sure I like the idea of the UK at all. Australia is really locked down. You can't even leave Australia, they say, until next June. It's incredible. I mean, they put everybody in the whole damn country under house arrest. It's shocking. So of these three, I would probably take Brazil. But you got to remember, Brazil is not one country. It's really like at least 3 or 4 different countries as far as living there is concerned. And so where are you going to go in Brazil and what are you going to do there? And of course, it sounds like you're an English speaker, and in Brazil, you're talking Portuguese, which is, as somebody who's not very good at speaking Spanish, I can tell you Portuguese impresses me as a harder language yet. But still, I'd probably pick Brazil at this point.
Yeah, me too.
Don't forget, Australia is where Mel Gibson's movie Road Warrior took place.
Exactly. Okay, so what does Doug think of the prospects of interstellar space travel and terraforming in the next century or so?
I think it's a great idea. I mean, look, you know, this depends on other belief systems that you may have, but I feel rather restrained just being on this little ball of dirt on a small star which is one of roughly, goodness, 200 billion stars just in the Milky Way galaxy, and there are hundreds of billions of other galaxies, many much bigger than the Milky Way. So I feel rather restrained being stuck here on planet Earth. So I feel very good about interstellar space travel, which of course, and until we can, find some way to mimic quantum entanglement, it's going to be very hard to get to other stars. I mean, the closest star is Proxima Centauri, which is about 4.3 million light years away, which means that traveling at the speed of light, 4.2. This is what happens when you start dealing with things with lots of zeros. 4.2, strike a million, 4.2 light years away. So even if you could achieve the speed of light, it would take 4.2 years to get there, but then you've got to accelerate up to the speed of light. And that takes an immense amount of power to do that, even in a collider like the one in Geneva. Forget about a spaceship. And then you got to slow down, which takes an equal amount of power. So I'm afraid that's in the relatively distant future. In the meantime, I'd suggest that if you want to be afraid of something or think of what's more likely, think of aliens that may exist based on what the government is finally releasing to us plebeians. I'd be afraid of aliens because whenever an advanced civilization meets a primitive civilization, it usually doesn't work out very well for the primitives, and we would be the primitives in this circumstance. But I'm all for it. I'm a huge science fiction bug, so
Yeah,
that's or not.
How does Doug rate the potential of a dictatorship compared to the potential of anarchy?
It sounds to me like there's a bit of confusion of terms going on here. I mean, potential of a dictatorship in the US, relatively high at this point. Potential of anarchy in the US, well, we have to define anarchy. And most people say anarchy, oh, that's chaos. No, it's not. Anarchy is simply the lack of government, the lack of coercion, and people living without a ruler. Totally different thing. In fact, anarchy is the polar opposite of chaos. I doubt we're going to get it here in the US anytime soon, more likely a dictatorship. But Hans Hermann Hoppe is one person. You can Google him. He wrote a book on this subject. Forget the name, but anyway, where he makes the point that we would all be better off if the world was divided into principalities and kingdoms and hereditary royalty, this type of thing. Because at least the king, seeing the kingdom as his property, would tend to treat it rationally, the way you treat your property, as opposed to democracies where it's a war of all against all. Anyway, I'm an anarchist. I don't believe in government. What am I missing, Matt?
No, I agree with you 100%. I think that dictatorship is far higher likelihood than an anarchic system in the US, at least maybe after there's a dictatorship and maybe after there's a substantial changes in the government or in the world, there could ultimately after that be a state of actual anarchy, which would be positive, but I don't see that coming anytime soon. Certainly not right around the corner.
But it's an ideal to strive for, and a great cocktail conversation when you introduce yourself as an anarchist, but you better know what you're talking about, because anarchism has, however unjustly, a very sad and unfortunate reputation among the public.
Yeah, and there's actually this relates to another question later where someone was asking Michael Malice's promotion of anarchy. I don't even know. Do you know who Michael Malice is?
There's something going off here in the background in this house. Ah, it stopped, whatever it was. Say again.
You know who Michael Malice is?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, well, he's a pretty good promoter of anarchy now. I think he's a great voice for it, actually. And he recently published a book. It's called the uh, oh gosh, it's like the Anarchist Handbook or something like that. Not cookbook, but handbook. And basically, what he does, he takes a bunch of the great essays that have been written by anarchists over the last 150 years, including like people like Lysander Spooner and folks like that, and he puts them all in one compilation, just because he thought it should be done, because he's trying to promote this. And it was actually a bestseller on Amazon. It was really doing really, really well when it was released just a few weeks ago. And I bought 10, one for myself and one to give out to people, anyone I could, because I think like that people reading like Lysander Spooner is actually amazing. When you've never heard of this guy, you read what he says, you're like, this makes a lot of sense to me. Makes a lot of sense. So anyway, he's a big promoter of it, and I think he's done a great job with it. And he's really great, I think. So if you look up,
well, recommending books though, Matt, I mean, when it comes to this, I always recommend The Market for Liberty, which is a very well-written and complete and logical explanation of how anarchism would work in the practical world. So, and it's free on the internet. I believe if you Google Market for Liberty, you come up with a PDF version that's free on the internet. In addition, of course, you can get a printed version from, I guess, Amazon.
Yes, I definitely encourage people to do that. We've talked about that a number of times on the show. And also I definitely recommend this, The Anarchist Handbook by Michael Malice. It's very good. It's very good.
Oh, interesting.
He did it as he did it because he felt like he just should do it, like it should be done, because it didn't exist out there, this compilation of anarchist essays. But then, it ended up being really, really popular, at least for a period of time. I'm not sure where it ranks right now on Amazon, but I thought it was great. I thought it was fantastic. So let's see. Doug, what do you think about the current events in Colombia, and if it's going to be a more liberal place after the population rebelled against the president?
Well, Colombia. Huh. They've had so many problems for so long, starting with a phenomenon called La Violencia after World War II and many years afterwards, where the conservatives would ride into town, and if you were a liberal, they'd kill you. Then when the liberals rode into town, if you were still alive, you were a conservative, so they'd kill you. And then it morphed into the drug wars with communist overturns. So this is a pretty bad history with all kinds of unhappy people that have had bad things done to them and their relatives and ancestors. So where's this latest round of things going to go? I don't know, actually. I actually don't know. But it seems to me that Colombia basically has a lot more going to it than its next door neighbor, Venezuela. A lot more.
Yep.
I mean, Venezuela is all about oil, and forget about oil. It seems to me most of it is giant estancias everywhere, except when you get into the jungle and that. But Venezuela is mostly kind of small holdings, and they have plenty of oil, but it's not of the nature of Venezuela, and the state doesn't own it all. So the problem with, all these Latin American countries is that they were founded on the wrong principles, and they've got a history of conquistadors in their background, as opposed to yeoman farmers, which is uh, kind of the basic ethos in the US. So the answer to the question is, I like Colombia. I've been down there, Jesus, I don't know, half a dozen times over a period of 30 years, which is a fair amount. I don't know what to tell you. People love Medellin. I like Medellin.
It's a great city. It's a great city, but I mean, at the same time, they did not handle this COVID stuff very well at all. Like I was down there over Christmas, and this is a very religious Catholic country, and they, you were basically under house arrest between Christmas Eve at 6 p.m. until the day after Christmas at 6 a.m. You weren't allowed to leave your house during that time period. And I mean, if they were, why was that? I don't know. I mean, why those dates in particular? I don't know. But it seems strange to me that if the country were willing to sort of bow down to that, just go, okay, well, we have to stay indoors. Then it just worried me about their resilience or their ability to resist a government dictates. And yeah, they tried to raise some taxes on, the poor within the lower classes, at least within Colombia, and people are pissed off about it and fighting. But there's also, it's that pissed off and fighting is deeper seated than the raising of taxes. It's like that's just the trigger event for it. And to me, it felt, when we were there in December, I felt like all my friends who were expats there were very Pollyannish about it. They're very Pollyannish about, oh, it'll be fine here. The Latinos would never tolerate this kind of craziness. And I'm like, this is on the 26th. So this is the day after it was locked down over Christmas. I'm having this party with these people. And I'm like, were you here yesterday? I mean, did you see what happened? I think they're going to go along with whatever. And it's concerning, very concerning. So yeah, Colombia is a great country. I worry that it's going to have its own upheaval though. And you don't know what direction it could go. I mean, it could, just like in Chile, which was much more prosperous and stable, has just flipped. So, they're rewriting their constitution. I mean, I think a lot of things are going to be up for grabs in the coming years, almost everywhere.
Yeah, that's right. Especially if the world economy melts down, which I think it's going to do big time. We might find that we live on the planet of the apes, which is disguised by a very thin social veneer and technology, which can break down.
Right.
Gloomy view. Okay.
All right. So next question was saying, this is an Israeli immigrant to Israel from the former USSR when he was 9. Says the main aspect that allowed most of the population of that region to survive the collapse in the 90s was the small pieces of land that each family had. It seems that I cannot get to that resource now. I am invested in commodities, mining stocks, some crypto, start to accumulate physical gold and silver. The question, will that be enough? If you have any advice, that would be great.
Well, I wonder if Israel is really the best place to be. I mean, maybe, but it's in a bad neighborhood, and if you're a Jew and if you're in Israel, it's better to be a Jew than a Palestinian. Something could go wrong. You're surrounded by hundreds of millions of people that, for whatever reasons, don't like you very much. Maybe there's a better place to be, but where? A real problem, isn't it? I think all you can do, the only answer to that question that I can think of right now is have as many abilities and as much knowledge and as many trustworthy friends and as good work habits as you can, and make it through that way. I mean, that's general advice and rather generic, but maybe most people don't think about these basics enough.
Well, I think the relationships with the people around you are going to be the most significant factor in the quality of your life over the next decade. I really believe that. I think, this turning of citizens against one another in the US seems like that's definitely happening. Definitely happening. And when you read about what happened during the Cultural Revolution or during, the Bolshevik Revolution, essentially in Russia in 1917, it's that turning of citizens against each other ended up being one of the probably the most devastating factor. Without that between the citizens, it would have been very hard for the state to ever do anything that it did in either country. And I feel like that energy is certainly building in the U.S., which really worries me because if you don't know and trust your neighbors, then I think you're at risk, unnecessary risk.
Yeah, you're right. That's the biggest single factor, actually.
Okay, so Doug, if it's true that most humans are just slightly advanced chimpanzees, is this good or bad for A, the entrepreneur aware of it, and B, the economy as a whole?
Well, I think it's good to be aware of it and set yourself apart from it. But on the other hand, it's kind of dangerous. I mean, if you're a black sheep, all those other sheep may pile in against you. So it's a double-edged sword. It really is.
Exactly. I agree. Okay. What is the best place to start learning about history? They say they're impressed with how comfortable we are discussing such a wide span of history. And they're wondering where you get started to really learn as much about history as you know.
Yeah, that's a good question because I mean, this is all of human experience. So it's a lifelong journey, and there's no magic book that even if you remember everything in the book, because then you have to integrate it with all the other aspects of living. So I just say, start reading stuff all the time. It's such a big question. I mean, this is, of course, where schools fail terribly and are failing even worse now because they're rewriting even parts of history that I'd say are quite accurate.
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, I know you were always interested in history. At least that's my understanding. For me, I didn't see any utility of knowing or really understanding history. It didn't seem like it was relevant to me until I was about 25. And that's when I started to read some. And it became, for me, it was about finding a particular topic that I was interested in. And that led to all kinds of other things. Like I was never interested in the World War II topic, for instance. So I would read other parts of history. And then eventually I learned enough around that about some World War II history. So I started to study that more. So but it has to start with something you're just particularly interested in, right? You can't just look for a general summary of, world history. So I don't know. Are there any great historians that you would recommend people read?
Well, my favorite historian, without doubt, is Edward Gibbon, who wrote Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Now, that's 6 fat volumes, and I haven't read them all. Most people, including myself, don't get much past the first volume, which is, I think, the most interesting volume anyway. But I like Edward Gibbon if you want to read somebody, because you got to remember, that book was completed in 1776, which is about midway between William Shakespeare and our current English. So it's perfectly readable, more readable than Shakespeare, obviously. He's got such an ironic and clever turn of phrase that Gibbon is actually a laugh riot. He actually is. He's really cracked me up funny in the way he describes what we know about Roman history. So that may be jumping off the deep end for lots of reasons, but you can't go wrong with trying to read the first volume anyway of his Decline and Fall. And who else? I would try to read something by Murray Rothbard, who wrote a multi-volume text called, anyway, it's on American history. And Rothbard was an economist more than a historian, but he was an excellent historian. So I would read that for his interpretations of American history, but it may be more in one bite than you want. It's a good question. I mean, this is, how do you eat an elephant? I mean,
You got to find
where do you start?
you have to start with something that is of particular interest to you, because you have to build this lattice work of time and, and space, and in order to remember all the different components. So it's like, you have to start with whatever area stands out to you. If you're interested in maybe, a lot of people focus on world wars or wars in general, and then they can use that as a part, or starting off with a biography of a historical figure that you find interesting. But that's, it is difficult. And I think Tom Woods has something called Liberty Classroom, and Liberty Classroom, they have a bunch of different professors talking about American history in particular, and it's extremely good. It's something my son has been doing for homeschooling. Tom Woods is a Mises guy. He's libertarian guy, and it's just excellently taught. So that's one place people would go to just get a overall sense of things. I think that's worthwhile. I also, if you really, I like Barbara Tuchman. I don't know if you've read much of her, Doug. But,
yes, I read two of her books. One called A Distant Mirror, which is about the 14th century, basically the plague years. And the other called The Guns of August, about the start of World War I. And she's a very lucid writer. Yeah, so that's very good.
Yeah, she also wrote a book called Stilwell, about this General Stilwell and the American experience in China from like 1911 to 1947 or something like that. And it basically, I learned like that this general was essentially in charge of all Chinese forces during World War II, General Stilwell. And so she wrote that book. I thought that was fascinating. So, but you gotta find things that interest you and then go from there. And maybe like some big overview summaries that you might find in Liberty Classroom, where you can consume more information more quickly, I guess, through from expert lecturers. That could be good. I know, Doug, you are a big fan of The Teaching Company and a lot of their lectures as well.
Most of their stuff is pretty good. I mean, almost all of it is. Yep, that's very good. And of course, there's so much good free stuff on YouTube that you can just start there and go from one to the other to the other. The only thing is the interpretation of history is so tendentious. You never know whether the person presenting these facts is slanting them horribly in an incorrect way. And of course, they'd say that about the way we would. So you have to make your own mind up.
Right. One other one I'll recommend is, I don't know if you've ever heard of this guy, Dan Carlin, who has a podcast called Hardcore History. Have you ever heard of that, Doug?
No, I haven't actually. No.
It is excellent. He does these multi-hour sessions where he's just talking about a particular topic, talking about Genghis Khan or talking about, I don't know, the Celtic Holocaust or whatever. But he's seems to be as objective as one could reasonably be, and very entertaining. And he has like an obsession with like the military stuff, so he likes those conflicts and talks about that a lot. But anyway, he's very entertaining, and he's free on YouTube, and I would definitely highly recommend him for people who just want a general overview. He's what I used him to try and get my son interested in history, picking a couple parts that I thought, because he tells it in a really compelling narrative, and it's really exciting slices of history. So that might be something people could consider.
The problem is there's just not enough hours in the day to do everything, even one thing. I mean, that's
right. But if you want
we waste so much of our time anyway.
Right.
So
if you want to learn about history, you have to find some area that is actually interesting to you and start there. Otherwise, it won't make any difference.
I agree. You'll get bored, turned off, and go elsewhere. You're right. Quite correct.
Okay. Doug, I would like to know if there's a secure currency. What do you think about the Swiss franc? Will it be affected by the dollar collapse?
Well, there is no such thing as a secure currency because every country in the world has a central bank. Every country in the world is inflating its currency using its central bank. And Switzerland, of course, historically has been the most stable of currencies. But that's changed too. The way the Swiss central bank is run is not the way it used to be run. Let's put it that way. A little bit of interesting history. Before 1971, when the dollar was devalued, currencies, I mean, big currencies, more or less stable currencies, I'm not talking South American currencies, obviously, were fixed. And the Swiss franc was fixed as being worth 23 US cents. The German mark, I remember this just because I was there, was fixed at 25 cents US. The Japanese yen was fixed at, was it 100 to 1 or thereabouts? And the British pound was fixed at $2.80. Well, look at the prices of all these things now. They're very, very different. So, and they've all done better than the US dollar, well, except for the pound. The pound's done worse than the US dollar since 1971. But no, you don't want to own currencies. I mean, they're trading sardines. They're not heirlooms. So think of gold as a currency. Think of silver as a minor speculative currency. And that's where you should be concentrated.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Doug, how do you keep up with current events without being exposed to or influenced by media propaganda?
Well, to start with, you don't believe anything that you read or see in the popular media. And you question all assertions and statements of supposed facts. You just question them all. And you look at different sources. The problem with Americans is we only look at American media, and the rest of the world really doesn't exist for Americans unless the army goes there or there's some kind of a crisis where we stick our nose into it. So I guess that's general advice. The only newspapers, incidentally, that I subscribe to and get are the Wall Street Journal, because it's financially oriented, and that's important. And the South China Morning Post, which gives an insight into China and that part of the world more than most publications. Well, what do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you can't take anything seriously. And I think you also have to be very careful with, there are sometimes media figures that you really agree with, and that you stop, they're saying things that you believe, and you start to think that they're a good source of information. And I think that over time you can find that they end up becoming a propaganda organ too. And I think that, for instance, like I like Tucker Carlson. I think that Tucker Carlson is just, sometimes he is so clearly, in my mind, speaking about things that are clearly true. At other times it seems like he's caught up in some narratives just like everybody else. So you just have to be, you can't just outsource the filtering of propaganda to like some media head.
Yeah, absolutely true. And I feel exactly the same way about Tucker Carlson. Sometimes he gets his facts actually quite wrong. He really does. And he goes overboard and gets a little bit hysteric, but he's not nearly as bad as Sean Hannity, who is nothing but a mouthpiece for the Republican Party, which stands for absolutely nothing.
Exactly.
And of course, it is fun to watch some of these other people like Rachel Carlson, Rachel Maddow, of course, just to see what these people are thinking. I mean, it's amazing.
It really is amazing. And I think that, and anytime I hear somebody though say that this side is a problem, and this is what Tucker's been doing lately, They'll talk about Democrats, Democrats, Democrats. And I go, I don't think it's Democrats that are the problem. Not to say they're the solution. They're not the solution, but they are not the fundamental problem here. The Republicans, the whole establishment. I mean, there's a problem that far exceeds a political party. And so anytime you start to get that pigeoning into, a binary outcome, this is good and that is bad, then you're being propagandized.
Precisely. It's a question of whether or not people believe in free minds, and I mean that literally, and free markets. And most of them don't. They feel, selectively, arbitrarily, some elements of both, but they're not systematic. They're not consistent.
That's right. Someone here wants to know if you have ever seen the movie Idiocracy.
I've heard of it, but I've never seen it. Sad to say, I've got to watch it.
Yeah, it's not a great movie, but it is. It does seem like it is the direction we're going. Put it that way. So yeah, it might be. It's interesting to watch. I think just to see that. So, let's see. Next question says, in your book Drug Lord, Peel says, quote, "Not even those assholes would do that," regarding making counterfeit drugs to kill people. This brings up many timely questions. Was COVID man-made and intentionally spread? Those who were speaking the truth about the China virus were branded conspiracy theorists, same as the people who spoke out against the counterfeit naked emperor. Finally, how prevalent is evil? Is it the norm, or are most people good, but too cowardly so they comply, or too stupid to fight back?
Well, that's a very good question, of course. And as in the novel, since you kindly referenced Drug Lord, which my co-author, John Hunt, thinks is the best of the three novels. And actually, I'm coming around to that conclusion myself, although I like them all. I mean, you love all your children, of course. But in the last novel, number 7, which will be called Apocalypse, Charles Knight is confronted with exactly that question that you ask. In other words, what percentage of human beings are actually basically bent and either beyond reform or whatever? And I'm a fan of Pareto's law for most things, the 80-20 rule. 20% of your salesmen do 80% of your sales, 20% of your people commit 80% of the crimes and so forth. So it's a bell-shaped curve on both ends. So the question is are 80% of people good and decent and honest and libertarian, or only 20%? Or maybe it's only 4%. And when I look at the people that I associate with voluntarily and want to have dinner with and socialize with and talk with, God, it kind of looks like 4% to me. That end of Pareto's law. But on the other hand, society generally conducts itself and most people don't do horrible things all the time. So maybe it's 80%. This is a subject that I'll have to explore, but it's worth thinking about, huh? What do you think, Matt? You have an opinion?
I mean, I don't think that most people are evil inherently. I think a lot of people are confused. A lot of people lack a moral compass because it's not part of our institutions, education, family life, or anything anymore. And I think that a moral compass can cause people to engage in acts that are evil-like, or unethical at least. But I'm pro-human in general. I really believe that most of people's problems are actually a matter of confusion. That's just my opinion.
That's very reasonable. And I think most of the evidence would back you up. But sometimes they go wild altogether, like they did in China under Mao, or
exactly
Soviet Union under Stalin, or Germany under Hitler, or Cambodia under Pol Pot. I mean, you can argue both ways, but generally I tend to agree with you. Most people are decent. And so maybe 80% are basically good.
Um, let's see. Why does Doug live in the US and not just stay in Uruguay full time, given the path the US is going?
Well, you and I were talking about that before we went on the air. And the answer to the question is I'm prepared to just walk away from everything I've got in the US, and it may become necessary, much as if I lived in Russia in 1917 or Germany in 1933, the smart thing would have been just to, walk away and see what's left when it all ends and you can come back.
Yep.
I mean, it's a psychological attitude, first and foremost.
So, but you do spend at least half the year outside of the U.S. You spend most of the year outside of the U.S. at this point.
Most of the year, that's right. And unfortunately, I don't travel much anymore because it's just too inconvenient and unpleasant to travel. It used to be a pleasure. It used to be fun, actually. But then first came, the war on terror, a forever war on the TSA, and now is the war on, some virus, and there'll be another one. So travel isn't as big an element as it once was.
Okay. And is there like I remember thinking after the financial crisis, it was like when, there's a lot of people were worried then. Right before that, I moved down to Argentina, kind of under reading your work and by your encouragement. And, when I would encounter people over the subsequent years, they would say, when do we leave the US? Like, how do you know when? Is there a trigger that you go? Because I think this is one of the biggest things. If you think that there's time to just walk away from everything you have in the US, like, is there a single thing that you would see that would happen that would make you think, okay, it's time to go?
Well, I see it as a process and a lifestyle, not a black and white switch. I'm now and not before. So you should be well established in 2 or 3 places around the world. I am. I enjoy it. It's pleasant. It's broadening. It's financially enhancing, I think, in many ways. So that's the correct attitude to adopt, as opposed to looking for that light switch to flip as to now. However, that said, sometimes a light switch is flipped and you've got to decide or you're going to be in the dark. So what is it in the US? The Bolsheviks, and I use that word, actually advisedly, because they're the same personality types that took over Russia then, or the Jacobins, same people that took over France in 1793, or the Red Guards, the same personality types. They're identical, same people. So we got them in office in Washington. Yeah, so I'm kind of getting an itchy. I hate to say itchy trigger finger because that that won't look good if they indict me for something. I'm just saying I'm getting ready to think of moving permanently.
Yeah. Back when I thought of our challenges as fundamentally economic and not a whole bunch of other issues, the trigger event I always thought was like, when the U.S. institutes capital controls, then that's the time to just go somewhere. Whether it could be a 2-week vacation and turns into a 2-year vacation, but it's time to get the hell out when you see capital controls come. But like, because the situation is so far expanded beyond only economic challenges at this point, I don't think that standard that I thought years ago would apply now. I don't think that's good enough of a triggering mechanism. I think that, you could be in great danger long before there are capital controls in place.
You're right, but when they do put on serious capital controls, which is quite likely, I think, how are you going to get your money out? I mean, if you go someplace else and you're more or less penniless, that's no fun. So, but what's the real trigger going to be in the here and now, other than capital controls? I don't know. Maybe if they really try to confiscate everybody's gun, as these idiots have said they're going to do, that might be the trigger.
That would be a good one. Yep. Yeah. I'm trying to think what else, but nothing really obvious like that, I guess. Taking guns would be a good one. I'll think more
Maybe
about.
if they, maybe if they insist that everybody be vaccinated. I mean, I wouldn't go for that, I've got to say. That would be time to get out of Dodge for sure.
Okay, so next question is, what does Doug think about secret societies, and are you a Freemason?
Not a Freemason. I think it's a dying organization. I have a friend who joined the Freemasons for strictly mercenary reasons, frankly, because they still are a center of wealth and power, but they're not what they used to be. I'm not a member of them. Secret organizations, well, I think they're just fine, but I don't belong to any. I do believe in the establishment of files, something we've talked about in the past, because it would be nice to know who the other people are that you share views on whatever's important to you. But that wouldn't necessarily be a secret.
Okay. Do you see one country or movement emerging as a beacon of light for those who choose to be free and not live in perpetual fear?
Country, no, doesn't exist. I mean, they're all political entities, and we've talked about how the wrong kind of person always and inevitably rises to the top of any political structure. So forget about that. Organizations, well, somebody's going to say, well, what about the Libertarian Party? And I see the Libertarian Party as, it's not big enough to be a cesspool. It's more like a toilet bowl where people that would like to get into politics, but aren't as bad as the Republicans and the Democrats. That's where they swim around. I don't know. What do you think? I'm not sure that I can think of anything.
I don't think there's anything that exists today that will prove to be that. I just think a lot of it's got to be wiped away. You have to have a clean slate, and then something could emerge. But I don't see it from right now. All these
I think you're right.
The institutions that exist today are against it. They're against that idea. They're against freedom and individualism.
You're right. And of course, the bigger problem is that once you wash away the old structure, then you have perhaps chaos for a while where things get even worse before.
Yep.
So.
But it seems like it's only out of that could something emerge. So next question is, does Doug have any plans to write his memoirs? It would be interesting to have a book of his interesting life.
No, I can't even remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, and I don't keep a diary. So the answer is no.
Yeah. Well, you should. I'm going to work on you on that one. I think you really should consider it, because you can't remember what you had for breakfast, but yet you can pull out these facts and experiences from 3 and 4 decades ago that are pretty extraordinary. So,
yeah, I really, yeah, regrets I have a few, but then again, too few to mention. My regrets is that I wasn't even more aggressive, and I wish that I wasn't as lazy as I am. I'm not really lazy, but it's all a question of your personal opinion of yourself. And I should have been even more aggressive and active. But
you've done all right.
Yeah. Okay, man.
Okay, so let's see. In Doug's book Speculator, he wrote a page about alpha, beta, and gammas. It's very fun stuff, and it's becoming very obvious in our society today who belongs where. More categorization is definitely not needed, but thought such a conversation between the two of you would be fun to listen to. So can you just describe that? I know you have in one other podcast we did a long time ago, but this concept of alpha, beta, and gammas.
And we're at the end of this podcast, so only the hardcore still remain with us, I'm sure. But alphas, well, the scientists did experiments with rats, which is what they always do first for all kinds of reasons. And they found what everybody intuitively knew. You got alpha rats that boss the other rats around and take the best mates and the best territory and food and all that. Okay, everybody knew that. And they're a small minority. Then you got the beta rats that do what they're told and take whatever's left over. Okay, that's fine. But then they found that there was a gamma rat. And the gamma rat was like an alpha rat in all respects, except it didn't boss around the beta rats. It was a get along, go along rat that, got the best mates, territory, et cetera, but didn't beat up the betas. And this was kind of a revelation. And I like to think of the gamma rats as being libertarian rats.
Right.
Although I have all kinds of problems with libertarians as a group. We could talk about that some other time.
Yeah. So the gamma idea is a very, very interesting idea because people generally think you're either an alpha or a beta, and neither one of those are desirable at all in my mind. They're just totally uninteresting to end up as one of those. And so the introduction of this gamma concept is, extremely appealing to me. Maybe my libertarian or anarchist leanings maybe lead me that way, but it is certainly, when I first heard that explained, because I was always trying to put myself in the alpha, beta route, like thinking I had to be binary. And so when I first read about that a few years ago, and then again, seeing it recently in your book, reminded me that there is another way. There is a better way.
Yeah, it's terrible the way people are confronted. Well, are you a Christian or a Muslim? I mean, okay, what kind of a choice is that to make? Are you a Republican or a Democrat? I mean, these are false choices that they're stupid. Actually, the choice itself is evil. So,
choice itself is evil. Why do you say that?
Because it's giving you a choice between, well, do you want to burn in fire or do you want to freeze in sub-zero weather? Which would you prefer? What kind of a choice is that?
Right. Well, limiting the human freedom down to some binary lesser of two evils choice, it seems like that. Yeah, I get how that could be evil. Okay.
Yeah. And the lesser of two evils is still evil.
Right. Okay. So just let me ask you one more question here to kind of wrap things up. Let's see. This question is, what about Austrian economists helped Doug most in being a successful investor?
That's a good question. Well, one help that the Austrians give is that they recognize that a proper economist describes the way the world works. He doesn't prescribe the way he thinks it should work. That's one thing, and that helps you to see that you've got to go with the flow of markets and recognize reality, not put it into a phony construct, which is something that a lot of the faux economists, which are almost all of them out there today, do. That's one thing for sure. Okay, if I had to put my finger on something.
Yeah, it's really it's using your actual observation of reality to determine what's actually happening and what you should do about it. Seems like our world is sort of that.
Yeah, I mean, we all have our own opinions on the way things should be, but you've got to separate that from observed reality.
Exactly.
So Austrianism is the only kind of actual scientific economics from that point of view.
Right. Although scientific is a phrase that I think people are deeply confused about right now. What does that even mean? Sounds like, yeah.
I mean, one of the worst things about this COVID hysteria is that the concept of science itself is being besmirched and made questionable, just like climate science is doing the same thing. It's destroying confidence in the scientific method. And, a lot of times I see these fools refer to it as the science with capital letters, like it's a a static, stable thing. I mean, we're living in a bizarre world.
We are. Okay, well, we'll leave it at that for today, and then we'll be back again early next week. And yeah, I hope you have a great weekend, Doug.
Thanks, Matt. Same to you.